The Last Picture Show, Act I. London, Autumn 1941. The Blitz enters its second year, transforming night into apocalypse with mechanical regularity. Air raid sirens wail at dusk, Luftwaffe bombers arrive after dark, high explosive and incendiary bombs rain down until dawn. The city burns, buildings collapse, thousands die. This is normal now, routine, the expected rhythm of life in wartime London. People adapt because humans always adapt, finding ways to survive circumstances that should be unsurvivable, creating normality within chaos. The Empire Cinema stands on Leicester Square, a grand Victorian building with ornate facade and gilded interior, built in 1884 when British confidence was absolute and the future seemed limitless. Now, in 1941, that confidence is shattered, the future uncertain, but the empire remains open, defying bombs and fire through sheer institutional stubbornness. The management refuses to close, maintaining regular programming despite nightly air raids, despite damage to the building, despite the obvious danger of gathering crowds in a structure that could collapse at any moment. The cinema's manager is Thomas Harrington, 53 years old, gray-haired, exhausted, committed to keeping his theater operational through determination that borders on obsession. He's managed the empire for 22 years, survived the previous war, the Depression, countless crises both personal and professional. He views the cinema not as mere entertainment venue but as essential public service, providing respite from horror, temporary escape from reality too grim to endure continuously. People need this, he believes. They need light and warmth and stories that transport them away from burning streets and collapsing buildings. Closing the empire would be surrender, admission that the Luftwaffe has won, that fear has conquered hope. His staff consists of 6 people, all volunteers who could find safer work elsewhere but choose to remain. Margaret Walsh, 50 years old, has worked as cashier for 18 years, selling tickets from her brass-trimmed booth with practiced efficiency. James Cooper, the projectionist, 62 years old, operates the massive carbon arc projectors with the skill of decades, maintaining equipment that's temperamental even in peacetime, nearly impossible to keep functioning during wartime shortages and bombing damage. Sarah Mitchell and Dorothy Evans, both 19, work as usherettes, guiding patrons to seats with dimmed torches, maintaining order during shows, helping evacuate during air raids. Charles Bennett, the elderly doorman, 70 years old, stands at the entrance in threadbare uniform, welcoming patrons as if this were still 1938, as if the world hadn't exploded into madness. The routine is established, refined through months of practice. The cinema opens at 2 in the afternoon, showing continuous programs until midnight or until air raid sirens force evacuation, whichever comes first. Most nights, the sirens come around 8 o'clock, interrupting the evening show, sending patrons streaming into Leicester Square Tube Station, which serves as bomb shelter. Some nights, the audience refuses to leave, choosing to remain in their seats, continuing to watch films while bombs fall outside, while the building shakes from nearby impacts, while death arrives randomly and without warning. Harrington never orders evacuation, never insists that people leave. He announces the air raid, informs patrons that shelter is available in the tube station, then leaves the choice to them. Some leave. Many stay. They've made calculations about risk and meaning, decided that spending their final hours, if these are their final hours, watching films in warm comfortable seats is preferable to huddling in cold underground platforms surrounded by strangers. If death comes, let it come while they're distracted, entertained, experiencing something other than fear. The films themselves are a mixture of new releases and classic revivals, whatever distribution companies can provide during wartime disruption. Hollywood productions dominate, American optimism and technical excellence providing contrast to British grim reality. Gone with the Wind plays repeatedly, its 4-hour epic of survival during civil war resonating with audiences experiencing their own civil catastrophe. Chaplin's The Great Dictator offers satirical revenge against Hitler, allowing audiences to laugh at the monster who's destroying their city. British productions play 2 patriotic films designed to boost morale, to remind viewers why they're enduring this, what they're fighting to preserve. But the specific films matter less than the experience itself. the ritual of entering darkness, sitting in plush seats, watching light projected onto screen while real world temporarily disappears. The cinema becomes sanctuary, sacred space where normal rules are suspended, where 3 hours can pass without thinking about rationing or casualties or whether your house will still be standing when you return. This psychological shelter is more valuable than physical shelter, Harrington believes. The tube station protects bodies. The cinema protects minds. September 15, 1941. A Tuesday evening, unseasonably cold, rain falling steadily, adding misery to danger. The evening show begins at 6, featuring Rebecca, Hitchcock's gothic romance about obsession and memory and the past's inescapable grip. The audience numbers perhaps 200, filling maybe a third of the Empire's seats, typical attendance for wartime. Many are regulars, familiar faces who come several times weekly, treating the cinema as second home, as refuge from loneliness and fear. Others are servicemen on leave, desperate for normality before returning to war. A few are couples, young people clinging to each other in darkness, stealing intimacy while they can, before circumstances separate them permanently. The film progresses through its first hour without interruption. Joan Fontaine moves through Manderley's shadowy corridors, haunted by Rebecca's memory, while the audience sits transfixed, absorbed in fictional tragedy that feels safer than real tragedy surrounding them. Then, at 7:15, the air raid sirens begin their rising wail, penetrating walls, drowning out dialogue, announcing that death is approaching from the sky. Harrington stops the projector, house lights come up gradually, revealing the audience in harsh reality. He makes his standard announcement, voice calm, practiced, speaking into the microphone that amplifies his words through the theater. Air raid warning has sounded. Leicester Square Tube Station is open for shelter. The cinema will suspend showing until the all-clear sounds. Patrons are advised to seek shelter but are welcome to remain if they choose. The decision is theirs. Perhaps 50 people stand and leave, moving quickly toward exits, heading for the tube station's relative safety. The rest remain seated, settling deeper into their chairs, preparing to wait out the raid in the cinema. Some light cigarettes, the red glow of burning tobacco creating small points of light in dimness. Others simply sit, staring at the blank screen, lost in thought, calculating odds, making peace with whatever comes. Harrington turns to his staff, gathered near the projection booth. Anyone who wishes to shelter in the tube may leave now, he says. No one will think less of you. This is not required duty. You're volunteers, free to prioritize your safety. But his staff remains, as they always do, loyal to the cinema, to each other, to the stubborn determination that this place will continue functioning despite everything. They've survived dozens of raids together. They'll survive this one too, or they won't, but either way, they'll face it together. The bombs begin falling 20 minutes later, distant thunder rolling across the city, gradually moving closer. The Empire shakes with each nearby impact, dust falling from ceiling, chandeliers swaying, the building groaning under stress. The audience sits in darkness now, Harrington having extinguished the house lights to avoid attracting bombers' attention, though this is probably futile given Leicester Square's central location and distinctive landmarks. They wait in blackness, listening to destruction approaching, to the Luftwaffe's mechanical terror methodically working through target lists. A massive explosion shakes the building violently, throwing people from their seats, shattering several windows, filling the air with dust and smoke. The impact is perhaps 200 yards away, close enough to feel the pressure wave, to smell cordite and burning debris. People scream, terror breaking through British stoicism, raw fear overwhelming the carefully maintained composure that characterizes the city's response to the Blitz. But no one panics, no one rushes for exits. They've experienced this before, survived previous near misses, learned that motion during raids is more dangerous than stillness. Harrington checks the building for damage, walking through theater with dimmed torch, assessing structural integrity. The walls hold, the roof remains intact, the screen is undamaged. Broken windows admit cold air and rain, but the building is fundamentally sound, capable of continuing operation. He returns to the projection booth, confers with Cooper. Can we restart the film? Cooper examines his equipment, checks power supply, tests mechanisms. Everything functions. The projectors survived the shock. He can resume showing immediately if Harrington orders it. Harrington makes his decision. The raid continues outside, bombs still falling, danger ongoing. Standard procedure would be to wait for the all-clear before resuming normal operations. But these aren't normal operations. These are people sitting in darkness, listening to bombs, imagining death, fear growing with every passing minute. They came here for escape, for distraction, for temporary relief from terror. He can provide that. He will provide that. He returns to the auditorium, speaks into the microphone. The building is secure. If patrons wish to continue the film during the raid, we will do so. Anyone uncomfortable with this may shelter in the corridor or leave for the tube station. Again, the choice is yours. We will resume Rebecca in 2 minutes. No one leaves. The audience settles into their seats, facing the blank screen, waiting for light to return, for the story to resume, for Joan Fontaine to lead them back into Manderley's gothic shadows. This is insane, Harrington thinks. This is beautiful. This is exactly why the Empire must stay open, must continue functioning, must refuse to surrender to fear. Because here, in this moment, 200 people are choosing art over safety, story over survival, meaning over mere existence. The bombs can destroy buildings, can kill bodies, but they cannot touch this human refusal to be reduced to cowering animals hiding from predators. Cooper restarts the projector. Light floods the screen, pulling focus away from darkness, from danger, from the war happening outside. Rebecca continues, the story picking up exactly where it stopped, as if the interruption never happened, as if reality can be paused and resumed at will. The audience exhales collectively, tension releasing, attention shifting back to fiction. The bombs continue falling, the building continues shaking, but inside the Empire, inside the beam of projected light, the war doesn't exist. Only the story exists, only the characters, only the manufactured emotions that feel safer than real emotions, easier to process, more containable. The film continues for 90 minutes while the raid progresses around them. 3 more near misses shake the building, each impact testing structural limits, testing nerve limits, testing the collective decision to remain. But the audience holds, stays seated, continues watching, stubborn determination matching Harrington's own. They came for escape. They will have their escape. The Luftwaffe can kill them if fate decides, but it cannot prevent them from finishing Rebecca, from seeing how Maxim de Winter's story concludes, from experiencing the catharsis of resolution even if their own lives find no resolution. At 9:30, the film ends. Joan Fontaine and Laurence Olivier drive away from burning Manderley, the great house consumed by flames ignited by memory and guilt and the past's terrible weight. The final credits roll. The projector's beam cuts off. House lights rise slowly, revealing the audience in their seats, alive, having survived both fictional terror and real terror, having endured despite everything. Then something unexpected happens, something Harrington has never witnessed in 22 years of managing theaters. The audience begins applauding. Not polite appreciation for good film, not routine acknowledgement of entertainment received. Real applause, sustained and building, people rising to their feet, clapping with intensity that seems directed not at the screen but at each other, at themselves, at the simple fact of survival, of completion, of reaching the ending despite bombs and fear and rational calculation that suggested leaving would be wiser. The applause continues for 2 minutes, 3, filling the cinema with sound that drowns out the distant thunder of continuing raid. People are crying, Harrington realizes, tears streaming down faces as they clap, emotion breaking through the controlled facade that Londoners maintain as protection against overwhelming circumstances. This moment means something beyond the film, beyond entertainment. It means defiance, resistance, the assertion that human beings are more than targets, more than statistics, more than collateral damage in someone else's war. The all-clear sounds at 10:15. The raid has lasted 3 hours, typical duration for major Luftwaffe operation. The audience files out slowly, moving through the lobby, emerging onto Leicester Square to find the city transformed. Fires burn across the skyline, smoke obscures stars, the smell of destruction fills the air. Emergency vehicles race past, bells clanging, rushing toward fresh catastrophes. People walk home through debris-filled streets, navigating around rubble, avoiding unexploded bombs marked by police warnings, returning to discover whether their houses still stand, whether their families survived. Harrington and his staff remain at the cinema, assessing damage, preparing for tomorrow's operations. The broken windows need boarding. The dust needs cleaning. The damaged seats need repair. But the essential infrastructure holds. The projectors function. The screen is intact. The Empire will open tomorrow, will continue its programming, will maintain its defiant assertion that life includes more than mere survival, that meaning and beauty and art matter even when, especially when, circumstances suggest otherwise. Margaret Walsh asks the question they're all thinking. Was that insane? Continuing the film during the raid? Harrington considers his answer carefully. By any rational standard, yes, it was insane, reckless, dangerous, potentially fatal. They could have died. The building could have collapsed. One direct hit would have killed everyone inside. The risk was enormous, unjustifiable by normal safety calculations. But normal safety calculations don't apply during the Blitz. Everything is dangerous. Nowhere is safe. Staying in the cinema was no more dangerous than sheltering in the tube, than walking home through debris, than simply existing in London during 1941. And unlike those other options, staying in the cinema provided something beyond bare existence. It provided meaning, purpose, defiance, hope. So no, he tells his staff. It wasn't insane. It was necessary. People need this. They need to know that beauty survives, that art continues, that human experience encompasses more than fear and death. The Empire Cinema provides that knowledge. We provide that knowledge. And we will continue providing it, every day, every show, every bombing raid, until this war ends or until we cannot continue. But while we can, we will. Because the alternative, closing, surrendering, admitting defeat, that would be true insanity. That would mean accepting that bombs and terror have won, that humanity has been reduced to cowering in darkness waiting for death. We refuse that reduction. We choose light, story, meaning, hope. We choose to keep showing films while the world burns. His staff nods, understanding, accepting, recommitting to their shared mission. They'll return tomorrow, will open the Empire, will sell tickets and project films and guide patrons to seats, will maintain this small island of normality in an ocean of chaos. They'll do it again the next day, and the next, through winter and spring and however many seasons this war continues. They'll do it because someone must, because the alternative is unacceptable, because human beings need more than survival, need beauty and art and shared experience that affirms life's value beyond mere biological continuation. Harrington locks the cinema's doors, leaves Leicester Square, walks home through smoky darkness. Around him, London burns, but London endures. The city will rise tomorrow, clear the rubble, bury the dead, rebuild what was destroyed, continue functioning despite everything. The Blitz will eventually end, the war will eventually conclude, peace will eventually return. But until then, until that distant future becomes present, the Empire Cinema will keep its lights on, its projectors running, its screen illuminated. The show will go on. The films will play. The audience will gather in darkness to watch light, to experience stories, to remember that humanity means more than survival. The last picture show will not be tonight, Harrington decides. Not tomorrow night either. Not until the last person in London has given up hope, has surrendered to despair, has accepted that beauty and meaning and art are luxuries that war makes impossible. As long as one person wants to watch a film while bombs fall, as long as one soul seeks escape through projected light, the Empire will remain open. The sea of fire surrounding them shall not have this sanctuary. The bombs falling from darkness shall not extinguish this light. The war will not claim this small victory of human spirit over mechanical terror. The first act closes with London burning, the Empire Cinema standing defiant amid flames, and tomorrow's program already posted, promising another day of shows, another opportunity for escape, another assertion that life continues, that beauty survives, that hope persists despite everything suggesting its impossibility. The Last Picture Show, Act 2. November 1941. The Blitz continues with relentless mechanical precision, though its character has evolved since September's desperate intensity. The Luftwaffe no longer attempts to break London's will through overwhelming force, having learned that British determination cannot be shattered by bombs alone. Instead, the raids become methodical, systematic, targeting specific districts with calculated cruelty, spreading terror through unpredictability rather than sheer volume. No neighborhood is safe, no schedule reliable, no pattern discernible. Death arrives randomly, arbitrarily, selecting victims according to mathematics that resist human comprehension. The Empire Cinema maintains operations through this evolution, adapting procedures, refining protocols, learning from each raid's lessons. Harrington and his staff have become experts in crisis management, capable of assessing bomb damage instantly, making rapid decisions about structural safety, evacuating efficiently when necessary, resuming operations immediately when possible. They've developed instincts for danger, can distinguish between distant impacts requiring no response and nearby explosions demanding immediate action. They've learned to function during raids with practiced efficiency, maintaining composure while buildings collapse around them, preserving normalcy while chaos reigns outside. The audience has evolved too, developing its own culture, its own rituals, its own understanding of acceptable risk. Regular patrons arrive prepared for raids, bringing blankets and thermoses, settling into preferred seats with the expectation that evening shows will be interrupted but eventually completed. They've formed community, recognizing each other across multiple visits, sharing cigarettes during raids, exchanging quiet conversation about families and work and the strange abnormal normality of wartime existence. The cinema has become more than entertainment venue, has transformed into gathering place for people seeking connection, seeking shared experience, seeking confirmation that they're not alone in their determination to maintain humanity despite circumstances designed to destroy it. Harrington observes this community formation with satisfaction mixed with concern. He's proud that the Empire provides this service, this space for human connection during inhuman times. But he's also aware of the responsibility, the weight of so many lives depending on his judgment, his decisions about when to continue showing films and when to evacuate, when to accept risk and when to prioritize safety. He's made correct calls so far, survived dozens of raids without casualties, but the mathematics of probability suggest that perfect record cannot continue indefinitely. Eventually, luck will fail, judgment will err, and people will die because he chose to keep the cinema open during a raid that proved more dangerous than calculated. This knowledge haunts him, disrupts sleep, fills quiet moments with visions of collapsed ceilings and burning seats and bodies crushed under rubble. He dreams of the moment when his decision to continue a film proves fatal, when the building takes direct hit, when everyone inside dies because they trusted his judgment, trusted that the Empire was safe enough, that beauty and meaning were worth the risk. He wakes from these nightmares sweating, heart racing, questioning whether his determination to keep the cinema open represents courage or recklessness, defiance or delusion. But each morning, he returns to the Empire, unlocks the doors, prepares for another day of shows, another evening of raids, another test of nerve and luck and the stubborn refusal to surrender. Because closing isn't truly an option, not while people need this place, not while the alternative is admitting that fear has won, that the Luftwaffe has achieved its objective of breaking civilian morale. The cinema must stay open. That necessity transcends personal doubt, transcends probability calculations, transcends the terrible weight of responsibility. Some things must be done regardless of cost, regardless of risk, regardless of the burden they impose on those doing them. November 17, 1941. A Monday evening, cold and clear, perfect weather for bombing, visibility unlimited, moonlight illuminating target areas. The evening show begins at 6, featuring Casablanca, newly released, already becoming phenomenon, its story of sacrifice and lost love resonating powerfully with audiences living through their own era of impossible choices and painful separations. The theater fills to near capacity, perhaps 500 patrons, the largest audience in weeks, drawn by the film's reputation, by the need for distraction on a particularly dark November evening. The film progresses through its first 40 minutes without interruption. Humphrey Bogart moves through Rick's Café Américain with weary cynicism, Ingrid Bergman arrives carrying memories of Paris and love destroyed by war, and the audience sits absorbed, transported to Casablanca's exotic danger, safely distant from London's immediate danger. Then, at 6:40, the sirens begin, earlier than usual, catching everyone unprepared, announcing that tonight's raid will be major, sustained, potentially catastrophic. Harrington makes his standard announcement, offers shelter in the tube station, leaves the choice to patrons. But tonight, something feels different, some instinct warning that this raid will be worse than usual, that continuing the show might cross the line from acceptable risk to reckless endangerment. He hesitates, considers ordering mandatory evacuation, breaking his established policy of allowing audience choice. But what authority does he have to force evacuation? What right to impose his judgment over individual decision-making? The patrons are adults, capable of assessing danger, making informed choices. Who is he to override that autonomy? Perhaps 100 people leave, heading for Leicester Square tube station. The remaining 400 stay seated, settling in for the raid, trusting that the Empire will protect them, that Harrington's judgment remains sound, that fate will favor them tonight as it has previous nights. Their trust humbles him, terrifies him, reinforces his determination to validate that trust through whatever comes. The bombs begin falling within 10 minutes, unusually quick arrival suggesting the raid is massive, overwhelming, targeting central London with unprecedented intensity. The explosions come in waves, systematic pattern moving through the district, each impact closer than the last, the Luftwaffe methodically destroying everything in a defined corridor. The Empire shakes continuously, dust falling in streams from ceiling, plaster cracking, the building protesting structural stress that approaches design limits. Harrington considers stopping the film, evacuating immediately despite the bombs, accepting that shelter in the tube station, however inadequate, offers better survival chances than remaining in a building taking this level of punishment. But evacuating 500 people during heavy bombardment, moving them through streets while bombs fall, herding them toward the tube station while shrapnel flies and buildings collapse, that might be more dangerous than staying. At least here, they're inside, protected by walls and roof, shielded from blast effects by the building's mass. Moving exposes them, makes them vulnerable, trades one danger for another possibly worse. He decides to continue the film, to maintain the illusion of safety through normalcy, to keep the audience focused on Bogart and Bergman rather than on the destruction approaching from outside. Cooper keeps the projector running, the beam steady despite the buildings shaking, light cutting through dust-filled air to illuminate the screen with images of Moroccan intrigue and romantic tragedy. The audience watches, transfixed, using the story as anchor against the terror surrounding them, clinging to fiction because reality has become unbearable. A massive explosion strikes perhaps 50 yards away, the closest impact yet, pressure waves shattering remaining windows, hurling glass fragments through the theater, plunging the auditorium into complete darkness as power fails. People scream, panic rising, the carefully maintained composure finally breaking under overwhelming assault. In the darkness, fear multiplies, imagination conjuring horrors worse than reality, each person isolated in their own terror, connection to community severed by the loss of light. Harrington acts immediately, grabbing a torch, moving to the front of the theater, his voice cutting through the chaos. Everyone remain seated. Do not move. The building is intact. We have emergency lighting. Stay calm. His authority, his confidence, his refusal to acknowledge panic, these things matter more than the words themselves. His presence reminds them that leadership exists, that someone is managing the crisis, that chaos has structure even when invisible. The emergency lighting activates, battery-powered bulbs providing dim illumination, revealing the theater in ghostly half-light. People are injured, Harrington sees, cut by flying glass, bleeding from scalp wounds, but no one appears critically hurt, no signs of major trauma requiring immediate medical intervention. His staff moves through the rows with first aid supplies, treating cuts, offering reassurance, maintaining the appearance of control even as the building continues shaking from nearby impacts. Cooper reports from the projection booth. The power failure damaged something in the electrical system, circuit breakers tripped, possibly blown fuses, definitely problems requiring repair before the projector can restart. How long to fix? Cooper estimates 30 minutes minimum, assuming parts are available, assuming the damage isn't more extensive than preliminary assessment suggests. 30 minutes during which the audience sits in semi-darkness, listening to bombs, fear growing with each passing second, the protective distraction of film removed. Harrington makes a decision that surprises even himself, emerging from instinct rather than rational planning. If we cannot show the film, we'll do something else. Something to maintain focus, to preserve community, to keep people connected rather than isolated in individual terror. He returns to the front of the theater, addresses the audience directly. The projector requires repair. We'll have the film running again soon. Meanwhile, to pass the time, I'll tell you about this building, about the Empire Cinema, about the history you're sitting in. He begins talking, improvising, drawing on 22 years of accumulated knowledge about the theater, about its construction in 1884, about the architects who designed it, about the opening night in 1885 when Oscar Wilde attended, about the thousands of films shown here, the millions of patrons who've sat in these seats, the performers who've graced this stage before cinema replaced live entertainment. His voice fills the theater, competes with the bombs outside, provides alternative focus, something to listen to besides destruction. The audience responds, attention shifting from the raid to Harrington's narration, fear receding slightly as they concentrate on his words, on the stories he's telling, on the reminder that this building has survived decades, has endured previous crises, has outlasted countless challenges and will outlast this one too. The Empire is more than structure, he tells them. It's institution, tradition, continuity connecting present to past and future. Buildings like this don't fall easily. They're built to last, constructed with Victorian confidence and engineering excess, overdesigned by modern standards precisely because their builders understood that permanence requires strength beyond minimum specifications. Margaret Walsh joins him, adding her own memories of working at the Empire, stories of famous patrons, of memorable shows, of crises survived and celebrated. Then Dorothy Evans contributes, talking about her grandfather who attended the Empire's opening night, who brought his children here during the previous war, who maintained tradition across generations. Other patrons begin sharing their own Empire memories, first visits, favorite films, significant moments experienced in this theater. The gathering transforms into something unexpected, impromptu community storytelling session, people connected through shared love of this place, this sanctuary that's sheltered them through countless evenings, that's providing shelter now in more literal sense. The raid continues outside, bombs falling steadily, the city burning, but inside the Empire, inside this community of storytellers, the war recedes to background noise, present but not overwhelming, dangerous but not paralyzing. The stories accumulate, build on each other, create narrative that encompasses decades, that includes thousands of lives, that positions this moment as continuation of tradition rather than isolated incident of terror. They're not just random victims waiting to die. They're participants in something larger, inheritors of legacy, custodians of institution that matters beyond individual survival. Cooper appears after 40 minutes, reporting success. The projector is repaired, power restored, film ready to resume. But Harrington hesitates, reluctant to interrupt what's happening, this unexpected magic of community formation through shared narrative. The film can wait, he decides. This moment, this connection, this affirmation of collective identity, these things are more important than completing Casablanca, more valuable than finishing the scheduled program. But the audience wants the film, calls for it, asks Cooper to restart the projector. They've done the work of maintaining morale through storytelling, have reminded themselves why survival matters, what they're preserving, what makes continued existence worthwhile. Now they want the reward, want to return to Rick's cafe, want to see how Bogart's story concludes, want the catharsis of resolution after the tension of interrupted narrative. Cooper restarts the projector. The beam cuts through darkness, illuminates the screen, brings Casablanca back to life. The audience exhales collectively, settling into their seats, returning attention to the film, to Bogart and Bergman and the impossible choices forced by war, by love, by circumstances that allow no good options, only least terrible ones. The story continues where it stopped, as if the 90-minute interruption never happened, as if bombs and darkness and fear were just intermission between acts. The raid finally ends at 11:30, 5 hours after beginning, one of the longest sustained bombardments since the Blitz began. The all-clear sounds, blessed relief, permission to stop holding breath, to unclench muscles, to acknowledge survival. The film continues through the famous final scene, Bogart sending Bergman away, sacrificing love for duty, for the greater good, for abstract principles that cost everything personally but preserve something larger than individual happiness. As the final credits roll, the audience rises, not immediately leaving but standing together, acknowledging what they've experienced, what they've survived, what they've created together during these 5 hours. The applause begins again, sustained and building, but this time directed explicitly at Harrington, at his staff, at the building itself, at the institution that sheltered them, entertained them, connected them, preserved their humanity during circumstances designed to destroy it. Harrington feels emotion rising, threatening the composure he's maintained throughout the raid, throughout the crisis, throughout the terrible responsibility of keeping 500 people inside a building under bombardment. They trusted him. They stayed because he stayed, because his presence implied safety, because his judgment suggested the risk was acceptable. And they survived. Everyone survived. The building held. His instincts proved correct. This time. This raid. But probability suggests the next time might be different, that luck will eventually fail, that judgment will eventually err. The patrons file out slowly, emerging onto Leicester Square to find the district transformed, multiple buildings destroyed, fires burning across the skyline, the smell of cordite and burning wood and something worse, the sickly sweet smell that everyone recognizes but nobody acknowledges. Emergency crews work through rubble, searching for survivors, recovering bodies, beginning the grim accounting of casualties. The raid killed hundreds, injured thousands, destroyed countless structures. But the Empire stands, damaged but intact, battered but functional, surviving another test through combination of good engineering, good luck, and stubborn determination. Harrington and his staff remain after the audience leaves, assessing damage, cleaning debris, preparing for tomorrow's operations. The accumulated damage is significant: broken windows, cracked plaster, damaged seats, structural stress that's approaching concerning levels. But nothing is immediately critical, nothing prevents continued operation, nothing suggests the building is unsafe for occupation. They'll open tomorrow. They'll continue showing films. They'll maintain their defiant assertion that life continues, that beauty survives, that humanity persists. Margaret Walsh asks the question differently this time. How long can we keep doing this? Not can we, but how long? How many more raids can the building survive? How many more near misses before luck fails? How many more times can they ask patrons to trust that staying is safe when evidence increasingly suggests otherwise? Harrington doesn't have answers, only determination. They'll continue as long as possible, as long as the building stands, as long as people need this service, this sanctuary, this affirmation that meaning survives catastrophe. That night, walking home through debris-filled streets, Harrington realizes something has changed, some threshold crossed. The raid tonight was worse than previous raids, more sustained, more intense, more dangerous. And they survived by abandoning standard procedures, by improvising, by creating something unexpected when circumstances prevented normal operations. The stories shared during the power failure, the community formation, the collective narrative building, these things mattered as much as the film itself, possibly more. The Empire provides more than entertainment, more than distraction, more than escape. It provides space for community, for connection, for shared experience that affirms collective identity during circumstances designed to isolate individuals in private terror. This understanding reframes his conception of the cinema's mission, expands its purpose beyond showing films, beyond maintaining programming despite raids. The Empire is sanctuary in fuller sense, not just physical shelter but psychological refuge, social nexus, cultural anchor that connects present to past and future, that reminds people they're part of something larger than individual survival, that positions their suffering within narrative that grants meaning to endurance. He resolves to expand this role, to create additional programming beyond scheduled films, to establish the Empire as community center rather than mere cinema. He'll organize discussions, lectures, musical performances, anything that brings people together, that creates connection, that builds community resilient enough to survive whatever the Luftwaffe inflicts. The films will continue, providing their essential service of distraction and beauty. But they'll be supplemented, enhanced, surrounded by additional activities that serve the deeper need for meaning, for connection, for affirmation of shared identity. The second act closes with London burning, the Empire standing defiant amid flames, and Harrington walking home with new understanding of his mission, new determination to expand the cinema's role, new commitment to providing not just entertainment but genuine sanctuary, space where humanity survives catastrophe through connection, through community, through stubborn refusal to accept that bombs can destroy everything worth preserving. The show will go on. But it will become more than show. It will become statement, resistance, affirmation that the human spirit cannot be extinguished by mechanical terror, that meaning survives despite everything suggesting its impossibility. The Last Picture Show, Act 3. December 1941. Winter descends on London with cruel intensity, adding cold to the catalogue of miseries inflicted on the city's inhabitants. The Blitz continues but evolves again, raids becoming less frequent but more targeted, the Luftwaffe conserving resources while maintaining psychological pressure through unpredictability. No pattern emerges, no schedule can be discerned, each evening bringing uncertainty about whether sirens will sound, whether bombs will fall, whether this night will be survival or catastrophe. The randomness is itself a weapon, forcing constant vigilance, preventing adaptation, denying the comfort of routine that allows humans to normalize even extreme circumstances. The Empire cinema maintains operations through this evolution, but the accumulated damage is taking toll. The building shows visible deterioration, cracked facade, boarded windows, structural members stressed beyond original design parameters. Each raid adds incremental damage, small fractures that collectively undermine integrity, reduce safety margins, push the structure closer to failure threshold. Harrington knows this, sees the warning signs, understands that probability mathematics are moving against continued operation. But closing remains unacceptable, surrender to inevitability that he refuses to acknowledge. The Empire will continue until it cannot continue, until final collapse or official condemnation, but not one day before absolutely necessary. His expanded programming has succeeded beyond expectations. The cinema now hosts afternoon lectures on literature and history, evening discussions about art and philosophy, Sunday concerts featuring volunteer musicians from service bands and orchestras. The audience has grown, regulars joined by newcomers drawn by the community aspect, by the opportunity for intellectual engagement, by the affirmation that culture survives catastrophe. The Empire has become gathering place for people seeking connection beyond mere survival, seeking meaning beyond simply enduring until war's end. Harrington's staff has expanded too, volunteers helping with the new programming, organizing events, managing the growing community. Local university professors deliver lectures without compensation, grateful for audience and purpose. Musicians perform for free, needing outlet for their art, seeking affirmation that beauty matters despite circumstances suggesting its irrelevance. Writers attend discussions, contributing insights, engaging debate, finding intellectual stimulation impossible elsewhere during wartime London's cultural shutdown. The Empire has become institution larger than cinema, cultural center preserving civilization's essential elements during civilization's temporary collapse. But the physical deterioration continues, concerning everyone involved. The structural engineer who inspects the building in late November issues warning. The accumulated damage is significant: stress fractures in load-bearing members, foundation settlement from nearby bomb impacts, masonry separation that compromises lateral stability. The building remains safe for current occupancy, but margin for error is diminishing, capacity to survive additional punishment is limited. One direct hit, possibly even one close miss, could trigger catastrophic failure, progressive collapse that kills everyone inside. Harrington receives this assessment with grim acceptance. He's known the building is deteriorating, has seen the evidence accumulating, has understood that continued operation carries increasing risk. But what options exist? Closing abandons hundreds of people who depend on this place, who need this community, who find meaning here that's unavailable elsewhere. Transferring operations to another venue is impossible, no alternative space available during wartime London's resource constraints, no other cinema willing to maintain operations during raids. The empire continues or this sanctuary ceases to exist. Those are the only choices. He decides to be transparent, to inform patrons about the structural concerns, to make the risk explicit rather than hidden. He posts notices in the lobby, explaining the engineer's assessment, acknowledging the danger, emphasizing that attendance is entirely voluntary, that people should make informed decisions about acceptable risk. Some patrons stop coming, calculating that danger now exceeds value, that survival requires abandoning this community despite its importance. But most continue attending, accepting the risk as price for meaning, for connection, for affirmation that life encompasses more than mere biological continuation. December 29, 1941. A Monday evening, bitterly cold, snow falling steadily, unusual for London, adding visual beauty to the city's devastation, covering rubble with white blanket that temporarily masks destruction's ugliness. The evening show begins at 6, featuring It's a Wonderful Life, American release that arrived in Britain through circuitous wartime distribution channels. The film's story of one man's impact on his community, of invisible connections that bind people together, of meaning found through relationships rather than individual achievement, this narrative resonates powerfully with the Empire's audience, reflecting their own experience of community formation during catastrophe. The theater fills completely, all 600 seats occupied, standing room crowded, the largest audience since the expanded programming began. People have come not just for the film but for the community, for the year-end gathering, for the collective acknowledgement of survival through 1941's horrors, for the shared commitment to continue through whatever 1942 brings. The atmosphere is celebratory despite circumstances, determination and hope coexisting with exhaustion and grief, the complex emotional mixture that characterizes wartime existence. The film progresses through its first hour without interruption. James Stewart discovers what Bedford Falls would become without his existence, sees the cascading consequences of one life's absence, learns that meaning emerges from connection rather than accomplishment. The audience watches with unusual intensity, seeing their own situation reflected, understanding that their community exists because individuals chose to create it, chose to gather here, chose to affirm collective identity despite circumstances encouraging isolation and despair. Then, at 7:30, the sirens sound, familiar wail announcing danger's approach. But tonight something is different, additional sirens joining the standard air raid warning, distinctive pattern that signifies maximum alert, indication that tonight's raid will be catastrophic, overwhelming, potentially unsurvivable. The emergency services are mobilizing completely, ambulances and fire brigades preparing for casualties exceeding capacity, authorities expecting losses that will strain the city's ability to respond. Harrington stops the film, makes his announcement, but modifies the standard script. Tonight's alert is maximum level. This raid will be severe, sustained, extremely dangerous. I strongly recommend immediate evacuation to Leicester Square Tube Station. The cinema will suspend operations until the all-clear sounds. Please proceed to shelter quickly and safely. His tone carries urgency absent from previous announcements, communicating that tonight is different, that normal risk calculations don't apply, that survival requires abandoning usual procedures. The audience responds, but not as Harrington expected. Perhaps 200 people stand and leave, moving quickly toward exits, heading for tube station's relative safety. The remaining 400 stay seated, facing forward, waiting for the film to resume, refusing evacuation despite maximum alert, despite Harrington's unprecedented recommendation, despite the obvious danger. They've made their calculation, reached their decision, chosen meaning over safety, community over survival, acceptance of death if necessary rather than abandonment of what makes life worthwhile. Harrington is torn, confronting the terrible responsibility he's carried for months, the burden of other people's lives depending on his judgment. He should order mandatory evacuation, should close the cinema immediately, should refuse to allow people to remain in building that structural engineer has warned cannot survive major impact. But what authority does he have to force evacuation? What right to override individual autonomy? These are adults, capable of assessing danger, making informed choices. They've chosen to stay. He must respect that choice, however much it terrifies him, however much it adds to the crushing weight of responsibility. He makes his decision, the decision he's been making for months, the decision that defines his war. We'll continue the film. Anyone who wishes to leave may do so at any time. But we will not abandon those who choose to stay. We will not surrender this community to fear. The show will go on. His voice breaks slightly on the final words, emotion overwhelming composure, the weight of responsibility momentarily visible before control reasserts itself. Cooper restarts the projector. The film continues, James Stewart learning Bedford Falls' true nature, discovering the invisible web of relationships that gives life meaning, understanding that individual existence gains significance through connection to community. The metaphor is heavy-handed, the parallel to the Empire's audience too obvious to ignore, but no one cares about subtlety tonight. They need this story, need this affirmation, need this reminder of why they're staying, what they're preserving, what makes continued existence worthwhile. The bombs begin falling within 5 minutes, immediate arrival confirming maximum alert's accuracy. The raid is massive, concentrated, systematic destruction of central London on scale exceeding anything previous. The Luftwaffe is attempting something unprecedented, saturation bombing designed to overwhelm fire services, to create firestorms that consume entire districts, to achieve through sheer destructive volume what targeted raids couldn't accomplish. This is annihilation effort to break London completely, to demonstrate that continued resistance is futile, that survival is impossible, that surrender is the only rational choice. The Empire shakes violently from the first impacts, bombs falling in pattern that brackets the theater, destroying buildings to north and south, methodically eliminating structures in progressive sequence that's approaching Leicester Square with terrible inevitability. Harrington realizes the Luftwaffe is targeting this district specifically, eliminating it systematically, that the Empire stands directly in the path of destruction, that survival tonight depends entirely on luck, on random chance that determines which buildings receive direct hits and which are merely damaged by near misses. He considers stopping the film now, evacuating immediately despite the bombardment, accepting that movement during raid carries risk but calculating that staying is more dangerous, that the building cannot survive this level of assault. But evacuating 600 people into streets while bombs fall, moving them through devastation toward tube station that's already overcrowded, that might itself be hit, that offers no guarantee of safety, this gamble seems equally fatal. At least here, they're inside, together, maintaining community until the end, facing whatever comes as collective rather than as isolated individuals. A massive explosion strikes perhaps 20 yards away, closer than any previous impact, pressure wave shattering the remaining structural glass, collapsing part of the ceiling, hurling debris through the theater, injuring dozens. People scream, panic finally overwhelming determination, fear breaking through the carefully maintained composure. In the chaos, in the darkness created by dust and smoke, the community fractures, individuals retreating into private terror, connections severed by overwhelming assault. But the projector keeps running, Cooper maintaining the beam despite the building's disintegration around him, light cutting through smoke and dust to illuminate the screen, providing focus, giving people something to look at besides destruction, offering anchor against the terror. And slowly, incredibly, people settle back into their seats, return attention to the film, use the story as lifeline pulling them back from panic's edge. The building is collapsing around them, death is approaching with mathematical certainty, but on screen James Stewart is discovering that wonderful life emerges from connection, from community, from the invisible bonds that make individual existence meaningful. The raid continues for 3 hours, sustained bombardment that exceeds duration and intensity of any previous attack. The Empire takes repeated near misses, each impact adding to accumulated damage, each explosion pushing the structure closer to catastrophic failure. The ceiling collapses in sections, exposing interior to winter sky, snow falling through gaps, cold air mixing with smoke and dust. The walls crack visibly, stress fractures propagating through masonry, load-bearing members failing progressively. The building is dying, Harrington realizes, structural integrity degrading beyond recovery, collapse now inevitable whether from additional bomb impacts or from accumulated damage overwhelming remaining strength. But still the film continues, Cooper refusing to abandon the projection booth despite the danger, despite the building's obvious distress, despite the rational calculation that staying means death. He's committed to finishing the show, to providing the community with resolution, with completion, with the catharsis of seeing how James Stewart's story concludes. The audience needs this, deserves this, has earned this through their determination to stay, to maintain community, to refuse surrender despite everything. At 10:15, during the film's final scenes, a bomb strikes the building adjacent to the Empire, massive explosion that demolishes the neighboring structure completely, pressure wave and debris hitting the Empire's weakened facade with overwhelming force. The front wall collapses partially, bringing down additional ceiling sections, filling the lobby with rubble. The building shudders, groans, every structural member protesting loads far exceeding design capacity. This is it, Harrington thinks. This is the collapse. Everyone dies now. The decision to stay, to continue the show, to maintain community despite danger, this decision proves fatal. He's killed them all through stubborn determination, through refusal to accept reality, through insistence that meaning justifies risk. But impossibly, the building holds. The main auditorium survives, roof intact despite gaps, walls standing despite cracks, the space remaining functional despite catastrophic damage to periphery. The audience sits stunned, covered in dust and debris, some injured, all terrified, but alive, surviving against probability, against expectation, against the mathematical certainty that suggested death. They look at each other, at Harrington, at the screen where James Stewart is realizing that wonderful life was his all along, that meaning existed in what he built, in who he connected with, in the community he created without recognizing its value. The film ends. The projector's beam cuts off. The auditorium falls into darkness broken only by fires burning outside, orange light filtering through ceiling gaps and shattered windows. No one moves. No one speaks. The silence is profound, absolute, 600 people processing what they've experienced, what they've survived, what they've affirmed through their determination to stay. They came for a film. They stayed through apocalypse. They chose community over safety, meaning over survival, affirmation of human values over acceptance of death's inevitability. Then, in the darkness, someone begins singing. A woman's voice, unaccompanied, tentative at first but growing stronger, singing Auld Lang Syne, the Scottish song of remembrance and continuity, of connections that persist despite separation, of community that survives despite time and distance and circumstance. Other voices join, building harmony, 600 people singing together in damaged theater, in ruined building, in burning city, their voices rising above the flames, above the destruction, above the Luftwaffe's mechanical terror. Harrington feels tears streaming down his face, emotion overwhelming the control he's maintained for months, for years, the weight of responsibility and fear and determination finally breaking through. They survived. Everyone survived. The community held. The building held. Meaning survived. Everything he's been trying to preserve, everything he's risked, everything he's defended against those who said closing was sensible, that evacuation was wise, that safety mattered more than beauty, all of it validated by this moment, by 600 voices singing in darkness, by the stubborn human refusal to be reduced to cowering animals hiding from predators. The all-clear sounds at 11:30, blessed relief, permission to breathe, to move, to acknowledge survival. The audience stands slowly, stiffly, bodies protesting hours of tension, gathering belongings, preparing to leave. But they don't rush for exits, don't flee in panic, don't abandon community now that danger has passed. They move deliberately, helping injured, supporting each other, maintaining connection, embodying the values the evening has affirmed. As they file out through the damaged lobby, through gaps in collapsed facade, emerging onto Leicester Square to find the district transformed into hell landscape, fires burning everywhere, buildings collapsed into rubble, snow falling through smoke to create surreal beauty amid devastation, each patron stops, turns back to face the empire, acknowledges the building that sheltered them, the institution that preserved them, the sanctuary that affirmed their humanity despite circumstances designed to destroy it. Harrington and his staff remain in the ruined theater, standing in the damaged auditorium, surveying destruction that makes continued operation impossible. The building survived tonight, but barely, structural integrity compromised beyond repair, safety margins exhausted, capacity to protect occupants eliminated. The engineer's warning proved accurate. One more major impact would have collapsed everything, killed everyone inside. They survived through luck, through random chance that directed bombs to neighboring buildings rather than directly onto the empire. But luck eventually fails. Probability eventually asserts itself. Tonight was the last show. The Empire's war is over. Margaret Walsh asks the question quietly, already knowing the answer. We're closing. Harrington nods, unable to speak, grief overwhelming him. The Empire will not reopen. Cannot reopen. The building is unsafe, unrepairable during wartime resource constraints, condemned by its own survival. They maintained operations through months of raids, survived dozens of near misses, preserved community against impossible odds. But physics is unforgiving. Accumulated damage has achieved what direct hits couldn't, has destroyed the building slowly, has killed the Empire through progressive degradation rather than catastrophic failure. But they succeeded, he realizes. They accomplished the mission, achieved the objective, preserved what mattered through the darkest period. The Blitz will continue, raids will persist, London will suffer additional casualties and destruction. But the worst is passing, the intensity diminishing, the Luftwaffe unable to maintain initial assault levels, resources and aircrew losses forcing reduction in operations. The city has survived, has endured, has refused to break despite maximum pressure. And the Empire contributed to that survival, provided sanctuary during the worst months, maintained community when isolation threatened, affirmed that meaning survives catastrophe, that beauty persists despite circumstances suggesting its impossibility. The staff gathers their belongings, prepares to leave the building for the final time. Cooper dismantles his projectors, carefully packing the equipment that served so faithfully, that maintained the beam despite everything, that kept light shining through darkness. Margaret collects records and cash boxes, documentation of the Empire's final months. The usherettes fold their uniforms, symbols of service now concluded. Charles the doorman locks the damaged doors one final time, futile gesture toward security for building that has no security, but ritual matters, ceremony acknowledges transition, formality marks endings with appropriate solemnity. Harrington is last to leave, walking through the ruined auditorium, touching damaged seats, looking at the screen that showed final film, remembering the community that gathered here, the stories shared, the connections formed, the meaning created through stubborn determination that human values survive despite mechanical terror. The Empire is closed, operations concluded, mission completed. But what was built here, the community formed, the connections established, the affirmation achieved, these things survive beyond the building's physical existence, persist in memory and influence, shape how survivors understand their experience, provide narrative framework that grants meaning to suffering. He steps outside, into Leicester Square's devastation, into London burning, into the winter cold and falling snow and smoke-filled air. Behind him, the Empire Cinema stands damaged but intact, battered but surviving, silhouetted against flames that consume surrounding district. The building will be demolished eventually, torn down for safety, reduced to rubble and carted away, erased from the landscape it occupied for 57 years. But tonight, in this moment, it stands defiant, testament to what was achieved, monument to community preserved, symbol of human determination to maintain meaning despite circumstances suggesting its impossibility. Other survivors emerge from shelters, from tube stations, from basements and cellars where they hid during the raid, returning to discover whether homes survive, whether families endure, whether anything remains of lives interrupted by war. They see Harrington standing before the Empire, recognize him, understand what the damaged building represents, what was preserved there, what has now been lost. Some approach, offer thanks, express gratitude for the sanctuary provided, for the community maintained, for the affirmation that human values survive catastrophe. Others simply nod, acknowledgement passing between survivors, recognition of shared experience, validation of choices made and prices paid. Harrington walks home through devastated streets, through burning city, through London that refused to break, that endured maximum pressure, that survived through combination of luck and determination and stubborn insistence that meaning matters more than survival. The Blitz will continue for months yet, raids persisting into 1942's spring, casualties accumulating, destruction mounting. But the worst has passed, the crisis survived, the test endured. London held. The Empire held. Meaning survived. Years pass. Decades. The war ends, peace returns, London rebuilds, the Blitz becomes history, then memory, then fading recollection preserved in archives and testimonies. The Empire's cinema is demolished in 1946, structural damage beyond repair, site cleared for redevelopment. A memorial plaque is installed, commemorating the building's service during the Blitz, acknowledging the community maintained, honoring the staff who kept operations running despite danger. But the plaque cannot capture what happened there, cannot convey the meaning created, cannot explain why 600 people chose to watch a film while bombs fell, why they risked death for beauty, why they affirmed human values despite circumstances suggesting their irrelevance. Harrington lives until 1972, dies at 84, having spent post-war decades managing other cinemas, never quite recapturing the intensity and purpose of wartime Empire operations. In his final interview, recorded months before death, he's asked about his wartime experience, about the decision to maintain operations during the Blitz, about the night of December 29 when the building nearly collapsed, when everyone nearly died, when stubborn determination came closest to proving fatal rather than heroic. He considers the question carefully, searching for words adequate to complex truth. We stayed open because people needed us, he says finally. They needed sanctuary, needed community, needed affirmation that life encompasses more than mere survival. We provided that. We maintained space where meaning survived, where beauty persisted, where human values were affirmed despite circumstances designed to destroy them. Did we risk too much? Perhaps. Did people die because of decisions I made? No, but only through luck, through random chance that could easily have gone differently. Would I do it again? Yes. Without hesitation. Because the alternative, closing, surrendering, admitting that fear had won, that bombs could extinguish meaning, that survival required abandoning beauty, that alternative was unacceptable. We chose light over darkness. We chose community over isolation. We chose meaning over mere existence. The show went on. That mattered. That still matters. The interview ends. The recording is archived, preserved for historians studying civilian experience during the Blitz, researchers examining how communities survived catastrophe, scholars analyzing the cultural resistance to totalitarian terror. But the recording cannot capture what Harrington remembers, what haunts him in final months, what defines his understanding of those years. The faces of 600 people singing in darkness, in ruined building, in burning city, their voices rising above flames, above destruction, above the Luftwaffe's mechanical terror. That moment, that affirmation, that stubborn human refusal to be reduced to cowering fear, that was what mattered, what justified everything, what made the risk worthwhile. The third act closes with London rebuilt, the Empire demolished, Harrington dying with memories that younger generations cannot fully comprehend, cannot truly understand because they didn't experience that specific darkness, that particular terror, that unique pressure that tested whether meaning survives when survival itself seems impossible. But the story persists, preserved in archives and testimonies, in memorial plaques and historical studies, in the collective memory of generation that refused to surrender, that maintained humanity despite circumstances designed to destroy it, that chose beauty over safety, meaning over survival, community over isolation. The last picture show was December 29, 1941. But what that show represented, what the audience affirmed through their choice to stay, what the Empire maintained through months of operations under bombardment, these things survive beyond specific date, beyond individual building, beyond particular community. They survive as testament to human capacity for creating meaning despite catastrophe, for maintaining values despite terror, for refusing to accept that survival requires abandoning everything that makes survival worthwhile. The sea of fire could destroy buildings, could kill bodies, could eliminate physical structures. But it could not extinguish the light, could not silence the voices, could not prevent the show from going on, from affirming that human spirit survives catastrophe, that meaning persists despite destruction, that beauty endures despite everything suggesting its impossibility. The show went on. That was what mattered. That is what still matters. That will always matter.